2016
I call to order the meeting of the Subcommittee on Merchant Shipping Local Vessels General Amendment Regulation 2016 and Merchant Shipping Local Vessels Safety and Survey Amendment Regulation 2016. Since we've got a quorum and it is also time to start. Item 1 on the agenda, election of chairman. In line with the election procedures set out in the Appendix 4 to the House Rules, I would like to invite nominations from you for the post of chairman. We need a verbal nomination by one member to be seconded by at least another member, and the nomination to be accepted by the nominee. Members, nominations please. I would like to nominate Mr. Frankie Yik. So we need someone to second the nomination. You nominate him, so I raise my hand to support. Mr. Yik, do you accept the nomination? Yes, I do. All right, in that case, well, since it's impossible to have another nomination, so I would like to invite Mr. Frankie Yik to come forward and take up the chairmanship. I just want to check with the two colleagues as to whether you want to elect a deputy chairman. No? Then in that case, we can start our meeting. Perhaps, first of all, we can invite the team from the administration to join us. The public officers in attendance are Ms. Joey Lam, Deputy Secretary for Transport and Housing, Mr. Ho Wing Hong, Assistant Director, Special Duties from the Marine Department, as well as Ms. Emma Wong, Senior Government Counsel from the Department of Justice. They are also accompanied by Ms. Crystal Chiu, AS for Transport and Housing, Mr. Wong Wing Hong, General Manager, Vessel Traffic Services, and Ms. Wendy Ho, also a Government Counsel. I'll give the floor to Ms. Lam. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. Our proposal is to amend Cap 548 Merchant Shipping Local Vessels Ordinance in relation to two pieces of regulation. In relation to local passenger vessels, we would like to have the installation of 3 items for the purpose of enhancing marine safety and to assist with navigational decisions. And in case of an emergency, we can assist with the rescue work. The 3 items that I'm referring to are namely VHF radio, very high frequency radio telephone, AIS, automatic identification system, and radar. For the VHF radio, it serves the purpose of enabling vessels in emergency to contact and seek assistance from the Marine Department's Vessel Traffic Center and nearby vessels. Therefore, with the installation of the VHF radio, it will be possible to have such an arrangement, but then of course we need someone to be listening to the messages all the time. According to international rules and regulations, if you hear any message in distress, then other vessels have the duty to go up to tender assistance to vessels in emergency. And of course the Marine Department, the police, as well as the fire launchers would also arrive at the scene instantly to take part in the rescue operation. Next, I would like to talk about the AIS, Automatic Identification System. When the system is on, it means that you are aware of the vessels nearby. You would know about the speed, the course, etc. So such a system can facilitate a coxswain to make appropriate navigational decisions in order to safeguard the safety. For the radar, of course, there's no need for me to elaborate on it. I think this is particularly useful when the weather is not good, so that you know about the vessels nearby and we can avoid collisions. Among the three items for the AIS, as long as you have it installed, then that's it. But then for the VHF radio, you need to sit an examination to prove your competency. In our proposal, it means that we'd like to ask a coxswain or an operator to be competent in operating the VHF radio. Well, for the purpose of convenience, so as to allow vessels to install the items, we are running a subsidy scheme. For the AIS and the radar, they're relatively more expensive, and therefore we have come up with a subsidy scheme so as to help the operators to install the items. As to the date of commencement, we have to make sure that the industry has got a sufficient pool of operators who are competent before we would like to make the regulations effective. Thank you. All right, colleagues who would like to ask questions? Mr. Wong. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In relation to vessels, I don't actually have much knowledge. In fact, I'm trying to ask questions on behalf of Mr. Steven Ho. He's out of town on a business trip. Therefore, I would like to put forward some questions on his behalf. Now, for those operating Class 1 and Class 2 vessels, usually we are talking about former fishermen who have changed their jobs and have now become the operators of such vessels. As you know that they haven't undergone any professional training. So with the need to install such equipment, I just wonder whether fishermen will find it difficult to change their jobs. Another question is about the educational attainment of the fishermen. For the radar test, you have to take a written test. In other words, if you ask the operators to take the licensing test or examination, I just wonder if they are able to measure up. As a result, they may not be able to get the qualification. And thirdly, it appears to us that the trend of the society is that, like in other areas of our lives, vessels will be equipped with more and more installations, devices, etc. If this goes on, fishermen are really worried that the growing complexity of the systems and devices would mean that they are asked to get qualifications, and it will become a hardship for them. My last question is as follows. Now, the fishermen know that currently, if you would like to take a course, it means that you have to pay a few $1,000s. There is indeed a training fund for them to apply for assistance. They would like to know for how long the fund will be available. So 4 questions altogether. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Wong. So Mr. Ho has in fact put in a written paper. Basically, he would like to have a written reply, but I'm sure the Deputy Secretary can answer the questions verbally at this meeting. Yes, indeed, I've been using his paper as my basis of the questions asked. Yes, we are aware of the concerns of Mr. Ho. Now, other than the coxswain as well as qualified operators, I understand that fishermen can also take up other tasks. They don't necessarily have to be operators of the two pieces of devices. To help the fishermen to change their jobs, I think the best way is to train them. For the seamen's union or the trade union for ferry workers, they've been providing relevant training courses. As to the radar examination, I think the passing rate is very good, over 90%, even covering the written test, yes, also more than 90%. Even if you fail the exam, you can retake it, and we are told that the passing rate has been over 98%. Moreover, I know that the test is a bit more difficult, but it used to be a bit difficult in 2014 in response to the request of the industry, and we have also liaised with the office, that is the OCTA. We try to take a pragmatic approach. When it comes to the use of a piece of new item, you need to have the knowledge. Otherwise, the equipment will be rendered useless, and we cannot enhance safety at sea. Therefore, we tried to adapt the examination in such a way that it is less academic, it is more practical, so as to help the candidates to pass the exam. So far, quite a large number of candidates have passed the exam. But of course, some of them do not actually operate the type of vessels that we have got in mind. A rough estimate shows that 30 to 40% of those operating the vessels in question have already attained the qualification. We are not trying to bring into effect the regulations so soon. We'll talk to the chambers of commerce as well as the trade unions to see how we can help the candidates to pass the exam. As to whether there will be more and more devices and equipment on board the vessels, well, in fact, for the past couple of years, we've been in close liaison with the industry, and we try to lobby the support, hoping that the proposals will be acceptable to them. In future, if we would like to introduce good equipment for use on board, we'll adopt the same approach. That is, we try not to have too much an impact on the industry before we introduce the measures. For the time being, we're interested in the three items in the regulations. As of now, we have got no plan or ideas to introduce another 5 more items. No, we don't have such a plan.
Even if we want to introduce better equipment, we will certainly consult the industry first. Regarding the training fund for sailors, that fund was set up in 2014. It will run for 4 years, and the response so far is very good. So by the time the fund has been operating for some time, we will, at the appropriate time, consider whether we need to extend the fund. Mr. Wong, are there any further questions? No, I think that's all the questions I wish to put. Thank you, Chairman. More than 10 years ago, I have applied for a shipmaster's license, but I would like to clarify a few terms. You used the term VHF. Radio. There is a specified frequency for people to ask for help. What frequency is that? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tam. I think that is a technical question which I would defer to my, technical colleagues. Mr. Wong, in the regulation, we specified a simplified frequency for sea navigation. In the shipping and port control regulation, we've already specified the frequencies. with which the ships can contact the Marine Department. Normally, the vessels will listen to that frequency, and they will also, send out SOS signals through that channel. Yeah, our frequency would need to be well, that is provided for in the OFCA regulations stipulating the megahertz required. We will use that channel, which typically is the channel used by all vessels. Now, when you apply for these licenses to operate VHF radios, using airplane as an example, there would be a specified spectrum within which they can operate, and they will need to be licensed to do that. I refer to 1.5, the frequency, because airplanes would use this frequency to send out rescue SOS messages, and all pilots would need to tune in to this channel or frequency. So my question is this: for the channel through which SOS messages are to be sent, would it interfere with the airplanes? I'd like to talk about the relationship between vessels and planes. When we fly and we use the 1.5 frequency, we would hear beeping sounds, which means that a particular plane or a vessel is sending out, a distress signal. We would hear that message, and we will inform the air traffic controllers that we've heard from this channel this particular message or signal, and then they will decide on the necessary rescue operations. They may decide that there may not be other planes in the area, but then there could be vessels or even machinery or maintenance machineries which may send out such a message. I'm worried that you are now requiring all the vessels to be installed with these radios, and when a plane flies through a particular section of the sea, so it may pick up more and more such signals. I'd like to know whether or not you're also using the 1.5 frequency. I'm sorry I gave you the wrong answer just now. The VHF channel is not the same as the 1.5. 1.15 is also the channel used by the vessels, but that is the EPROP channel. The VHF channel is not the same. Okay, well that would answer my question. And secondly, regarding the examination requirement, you stipulate that you're talking about category 1 vessels with 12 and 100 seats respectively. For vessels carrying more than 100 passengers, it will need to be equipped with radar. For the exam in question, when people sit for the exam, when somebody has obtained a license to qualify as a coxswain, does mean that they can be exempted. Mr. Wong or Mr. Ho? Regarding the examination, we have no such plan. That is, after you have qualified to become a coxswain, we will not require you to sit for the exam to obtain the license to operate the VHF radio or the radar, because on the vessel there could be two persons holding the license of coxswain, and we only require one such person to be licensed. So it's not necessary to make it compulsory for both to sit for the examination. That is, anyone who applies for the coxswain license will be required to also obtain the license to operate the radar and the VHF radio. My other question is regarding the automatic identification system. So does it mean that the system will only enable you to find out the location and the speed of a particular vessel in a particular location? And somewhere in the paper you also talk about the anti-collision system. Is that a different system? It's the same. the collision prevention system, I think the radar will play a more important role here. For the AIS, when the vessel is traveling, you would be able to find out what are the other vessels in the vicinity and the direction they are traveling. And based on such information, the coxswain will determine the course that his vessel would take. For example, whether it should, move faster or move at a slower speed, or should they change direction. So the AIS, if all the vessels are equipped with the AIS, it would make it easier for the Marine Department's control center to monitor all the vessels at sea and how they are moving, and will be able to obtain information for analysis. But the radar in question can also provide for an anti-collision function. Is that right, Mr. Wong? Well, let me supplement the bit about the operation of a vessel. The main purpose of the radar is to prevent collision. That is the main purpose for which the radar is used. This is the main reason why we require vessels to be equipped with radars. That is to prevent collision. Whereas for the AIS, it will constantly send out signals indicating the location, the direction, and the speed of the vessel at which the vessel is moving, so that its identity could be recorded. And with the AIS, other vessels will be able to pick up the signals, and you will be able to know about the whereabouts of the vessels in the vicinity, so that the coxswain will be able to determine on the right course to take. If we see that another vessel in the vicinity, then if they're traveling on a path which might result in collision, then the coxswain will make the appropriate decision to prevent that from happening. And since the AIS will constantly emit information or messages, the government's department can also pick up such signals and would know about the whereabouts of these vessels, and it can also record the data to help it analyze the traffic situation at sea, to help it make the necessary plans. Since the AIS constantly emit signals, then we would be able to find out the whereabouts of a particular vessel very quickly. Thank you. For the system, the AIS systems and radars which are available in the market, normally are the two distinct systems, or are they yeah, they are separate systems. Now, regarding the subsidy scheme, the price that you have suggested, have you actually make reference of the market prices, the current market prices? Because I'm thinking that when you determine the level of subsidy, you have to ensure that there won't be any subsidies, so that there won't be any over-subsidy, and as a result of which the vendors will increase the price. Or on the other hand, the price that the subsidy you provide may not be enough to cover the cost. When we before we decide on the subsidy scheme, we actually conducted a market survey to find out about the price of the equipment and the cost of installation. After we've obtained an average market average, we would then set the subsidy level. So it's not something that we simply decide on arbitrarily. Regarding the implementation date, now before the regulation come into effect, will you allow enough time for the trade to make sure that they can comply with your requirements? For example, how many vessels need to install such equipment because of the amendments? That is, if the amendment regulations were to come into effect tomorrow, how many vessels will satisfy your requirements? Could you give us such data? Thank you, Mr. Tam. For the AIS, we expect that the number 326 vessels will be affected. For radars, it should be around 41, and for vessels equipped with VHS radio, we're talking about 314 vessels. After we have completed the subsidy scheme, most of the vessels would have been equipped with the AIS system. As for the radar, actually last week we have been talking to the trade, and we told that when the subsidy scheme was first launched, they had some misunderstanding that the radar on the existing radar on the vessel can already comply with the new requirements, but subsequently they found out that that might not be so, because the system that they have on board may not satisfy the latest requirement. And that is why we've talked to them and we've agreed to extend the subsidy scheme. We decided to extend it for another 6 months, so that it will only expire at the end of September 2017. So that within the next 6 months, they can apply for the subsidy so that they can install the system. And after that, they still have 2 months after installation to familiarize themselves with the operation of the new system. And in December 2017, the new regulations will come into force. Before that, we will also remind them about the commencement of the new regulations so that they will all be able to comply. Regarding the VHS radio, it's not a question of equipment, but rather it's a question of training. As I said, according to a rough estimate, only 30 to 40% of the people in the trade know how to use that radio, but there are many people who don't. So you therefore need to wait. We will ask the trade associations and the training institutes to step up their training so that we would have 60 to 70% of the people who are ready, after which we will decide on the commencement date. But we do not intend to say to do that next week or next month. The commencement date will allow for a long cushion. We will inform the trade that this will come into effect sometime, say, for example, next year, and we'll allow enough time for people in the trade to attend the training. I have no questions regarding the AIS and the radar. I believe the shipping companies would encourage the staff to apply for the license as soon as possible. But as for the VHS radio, you say only 30 to 40% of the people in the trade know how to operate it. You say that this will come into effect in December this year. No, it's not decided yet. So for the end of 2017, it's only for AIS and the radar. So for the VHS radio, we don't know yet when the new requirement will come into effect. But does the Marine Department provide training courses, or do the people in the trade have to, attend courses elsewhere? And how many people do you expect will sit for such examinations? And when they apply to sit for the examination, can they do so every month, or do you have an exam which is held once every 3 months and so on?
Wow.
Maybe the Marine Department can take the question. Well, in fact, it's OFCA that is hosting the examination rather than the Marine Department. So who will provide the courses? We have a ferry trade union, and also the Seafarers Association are also running the courses. It isn't so much about the provision of courses. I think it is quite like what Mr. Wong has talked about in relation to the difficulty for fishermen. They may need to have a change of mindset. Say, for example, they need to memorize A for alpha, B for boy, B for Bravo rather, B for Bravo. So they may need time to adjust to that. Sorry, Chair, I still have to ask some questions. That is, how frequent are the exams held? That is, in relation to the off-cur exams. Well, they can be very flexible in relation to the application to sit the exam. So it's not a matter of fighting to get a place. It's a matter of whether there are sufficient candidates to take the course and sit the exam. So it appears that the industry doesn't think that it is a problem. I think the training programs as well as the examination aren't really the difficulties. If there are many people who are interested in taking the exam, I think administratively we can arrange for more frequent exams to be held. Sorry, Chairman, one more question. I want to know, since you've told us that they need to learn by heart A for Alpha, B for Bravo, C for Charlie. So I want to know whether the test has to be taken in English. No. But, say for example, some English appear in the number plate of the vessel, so you have to be very clear about the pronunciation, whether someone is talking about M or N. There are two parts to examination. First of all, for a vessel in distress or in emergency, you need to know about the sequence of the steps to be taken as well as the messages to be transmitted. So that's written. And then for the second part, you can either take a written test or oral test. So someone can ask you, what does this mean? Well, I think the most difficult part is the one that I referred to, and even I tripped over that. And when they use the VHF radio, we want to make sure that the two parties to the communication can understand each other. What we want to make sure is that when there's an emergency, other than talking to the Marine Department's Vessel Traffic Center, we hope that the vessels nearby can also communicate. The operators of nearby vessels may very well be foreigners, say for example Indian, so they want to be sure, or we want to be sure that what we are talking about. Mr. Wong, for such courses, probably the VTC as well as the relevant trade unions have provided the relevant courses. I think it all depends on the demand in the market, and then they will provide the right number of classes. My question is it the Marine Department that is running the examination, or the training bodies carrying out the assessment, and then they report the assessment outcome to the Marine Department and issue a certificate? My second question is, for the VHF radio, it is quite unlike a conversation with family members. Rather, we are talking about conversation at an international level. In other words, even when you try to call for help, you can't expect others to understand you if you cry out for help in Cantonese. So you need to be able to talk the international language. So it is understandable in relation to your requirements. I don't expect serious problems, but what worries me most is that for the ordinary fishermen. They want to change their jobs, and now that you have this expectation of them, I think they will have some difficulties, there was some hardship. So make sure that when you enact the regulation, watch out for their plight. Now, the fishing industry is in decline. Many fishermen have to operate commercial vessels. So please answer the question as to who will be issuing the certificates. Well, the exam will be held by the OFCA. The training courses will be held by the ferry trade unions as well as the Seafarers Association. Upon completion of the course, then the course provider will apply to the OFCA to hold an examination. OFCA will also issue a certificate. As far as the MD is concerned, we do not play any role. Any other questions? No? Then let me ask my questions. Well, basically, colleagues have asked many relevant questions. Now that you are going to have the VHF radio, you want to have the AIS. Now we need to understand that for the elderly fishermen, they have difficulties in learning English. Even for them to memorize the 26 alphabets, it will be quite difficult. Now I want to know whether there is an emergency button on the equipment so that the MD at the receiving end can instantly tell that the vessel is in emergency. So let me check with you first of all whether this is available. Let me explain as to the device that Mr. Yip refers to. We do have it. It is called DSC radio. Well, we would like to upgrade the equipment. It is not inexpensive. Yes, you can press a button and send out a signal for help, but then the information is not complete. You only give the location of the vessel as well as the name of the vessel. For more details, we need to hold a conversation. Well, for the AIS, I want to know whether it is the case that basically it has been installed in all the vessels. That's fine for Class 1 vessels. For Class 2 vessels, we've just started the subsidy scheme. Yes and no, because the deadline hasn't expired. And then for the radar, the expiry date will be extended by 6 months, because at first some operators thought that their radar was up to standard, but in fact not. So you're going to have another 6 months for them. Mr. Wang Ting-Kwong also asked about the hardship of the elderly fishermen. It will be very difficult for them to learn the code names for the 26 alphabets. Now we know about the simplified examination that has been introduced. 3 persons have been sent out to take a test examination. All of them have failed. And that's why I would like to know whether it is possible to press one single button and then vessels nearby would know that there is a vessel in emergency. I may be a crewman and I cannot use the code names for the 26 alphabets. Can I sort of try to simply give a message to the VTC, talk about the nature of the accident, say whether I have hit an article or something. So I want to know whether you can talk to OFCA. Is it possible to find a way to get around the code names for the 26 alphabets? Because I don't think the fishermen can really pass the exam in relation to that part. I think the most important point is to make sure that they can describe the nature of the accident or the incident. If you can do that, we can introduce the regulation earlier. We know that it is difficult to get new recruits to join the industry. The workers are aging. No, sorry, like the VHF equipment, you need to get a certificate before you can operate it. Is it possible to press a button and then my information will be shown on your screen, and then I will say that we hit a rock and then water is seeping in, skipping the requirement to recite the name or the registration number of the vessel? If you don't simplify the code names, I'm afraid that eventually many vessels will be rendered inoperable because it is an issue that cannot be resolved. So can you tell us what you have got in mind? Well, before we came to this meeting, we did have a full discussion about this point. Well, in relation to the VHF radio, it isn't just about communication with the police or the marine department. There may be vessels nearby and you need to communicate in an internationally acceptable way. Of course, I can understand the concern of Mr. Wong and Mr. Yik. Now, let me put it in this way. First of all, let's see whether enhanced training can help. If somebody really wants to do it, we are only talking about 26 alphabets. So if you try to adopt rote learning, well, you know that for fishermen, in relation to this point, I am willing to talk to the OFCA further. But of course, we know that the nature of the proposals is to have enhanced use of the equipment so as to give assistance to the rescue operations. If we skip that requirement, it will be meaningless to have the equipment on board. Thank you, DS. If necessary, I can ask for the representatives of my constituency to meet with OFCA. Now, the ocean-going vessels don't have this problem. I'm talking about vessels below the category of passenger vessels. We're talking about elderly operators. They only operate in the inshore waters. So do we really need to communicate with international vessels? I think it's a matter of they being in a different category.
I understand your point. Last year, we actually looked into this. In case there's an accident in near shore waters, if in the vicinity you have a vessel operated by a foreigner, then but if the coxswain of that vessel cannot understand the call for help, then it would be a pity. So we need to strike a balance. So we'll try to see what else we can do to further streamline or simplify the requirements. Well, I hope the department will not be so rigid. Say for distress call, Mayday, Mayday, we know what's happening. But can we provide for certain buttons to represent, distress signals or whatever? So the first button could stand for this, and the second button can stand for something else. It's easy to require these retired fishermen to press those buttons, but if you require them to say it out, they may not be able to do that. Don't think of them, according to your own standards. Mr. Wong, I think you made a very good point. All you need to do is to provide for a keyboard, link it with the system so that it can be very easily done. It's not really high tech. You need to be people focused. Yeah, that's the first thing we had thought of already. But the VHS radio, other than allowing you to pick up signal and to send out signals, you can affix a device so that the coxswain or the sailor can press a button and send out the distress signal. Yeah, we understand. We will look into this further. For the VHS radio, since we have not yet provided for the commencement date, so I think we still have some flexibility there. We will try and see what else we can do to enable this to be implemented. Mr. Tam, I think the problem we discussed earlier can be resolved. We're talking about one way, but not both-way communication. Let's say you have an expatriate sailor sending out a distress signal. Let's say he needs to use the codes A, B, C, D, E as they have been trained to do so, and there's another vessel in the vicinity. Then the people on board don't understand those signals, and you will not be able to come for the rescue. I'm not saying that we should use button to replace that, but what I'm proposing is that we have a true track system, so that the sailors at least should have received the basic training, but the keyboard can enable them to press the button to send out those signals. So I think we can have a true track system, because that is more people focused, and it will be a lot easier for the retired fishermen, so that, as Mr. Steven HO said, it would not be making things difficult for them. So don't create the impression that you are making things difficult for them. All right. If there are no further questions, shall we move on to the clause-by-clause scrutiny of the regulations? All right. Thank you, Chairman. Appears to be a very thick document, but there's really not much to it. So are we looking at the English version or the Chinese version? The first section would be the interpretation, spelling out our new requirements. I don't think there's any problem with the interpretation. So these are simply the interpretation of the terms. Page 3 would be the automatic identification system. We are proposing that vessels licensed to carry more than 100 passengers, or vessels carrying dangerous goods, that's class 2 vessels, will both be required to install the AIS. But if the vessel doesn't have an engine and is not carrying dangerous goods, then it will be exempt. 33B some of the detailed requirements that the system would need to be operational all the time, and if it is not stopped, and when it is when it should be restarted again. All right. Next, radar equipment application scope would be ferries or vessels that operate the franchise service, and those which plies outside the boundaries of Victoria Harbour and so on. And also for floating restaurant and stationary vessels, they will be exempt. Page 6, same as the previous section. Here we are spelling out the requirements. That is, the vessel would need to have the radar operational at all times. If it happens to be switch off, it should be switched on immediately. Again, page 7, would be the radio telephone equipment, and this is the VHS radio I referred to earlier. That is Class 1 vessels carrying more than 12 passengers will be required to be installed with this VHS radio, except or if such a radio were equipped, then a licensed person would need to be on board to operate the radio. On page 833G, I think the legal advisor has a point to make here. Thank you. 33E bracket 2, I believe, according to I have early on written to the administration requiring and clarification of the Chinese terms to the extent necessary. I've asked the government to clarify a point here because compared with the current subsidiary legislation, the drafting is different. The government has already clarified this. So there's nothing wrong with the 33E bracket 2. The Chinese version is now in order. Thank you. Page 8, 33G, VHS radio telephone communication. Cannot be used for personal, chit-chat. It can only be used to send out distress signals or to communicate with the Marine Department. And communication between vessels cannot be, would not be allowed, So one cannot use these VHS radio for, casual, informal, conversation. 33I, other than such vessels which need to be switched on at all times, the persons aboard should be vigilant and to see whether there are any distress signals that they may pick out from vessels which have been sent out by vessels in the vicinity, and 33I2 requires somebody to be on duty to monitor that. So these are the operational requirements. And next we can turn to page 11, which is about the vessels handling explosives or flammable liquids. When we dealt with the amendments, we updated some of the other regulations, and this is in compliance with the International Convention on Marine Safety. Page 12, we deleted many things because under the current ordinance, since we have new provisions in place, no need to repeat some of the terminology. Same for page 13 and 14, as well as 15. And page 16. Next we come to CAP 548. The previous amendment regulation is about the operation, but this part is about the installation of the equipment. So again, it provides for the interpretation, the application, and so on. Page 1 would spell out the specifications for the equipment. Same for pages 2, 3, and 4. Basically, it's the same as what we looked at just now regarding the operation. But here we're talking about the installation and the survey. And the other one is about the International Convention and the 60 degree. The following pages are what we've deleted from the current ordinance because of the new amendments. from 61 to 60 degree? No. So it has to be below 61 degree. The other version, shouldn't be higher than 60 degree. So it's the same actually, basically, right? Either it's not high. So these are the textual amendments. Legal Advisor, thank you. I'd like to refer members to page 5, which is about the requirement for the AIS. In the subsidiary legislation, the vessels concerned would need to be installed with an AIS. So what is meant by AIS system? The definition is provided for on page 5. It refers to a system that meets the relevant requirements from 1 to 5. B, according to B, it says the IAS is able to be able to receive the specified information. And on page 6, specified information means for certain vessels, in relation to a vessel, including the identity type, position, and course, and so on. Since the definition of specified information is drafted as what is included, and therefore you have one issue arising from that. That is, how can the persons concerned be able to comply with the requirements for the AIS? I'd like members to note that if the vessels concerned are not equipped with the AIS system, the owner of the vessel, the agent, and the coxswain, if they don't have an appropriate excuse, would be in breach. According to the subsidiary legislation, the maximum penalty for that will be level 3, a line at level 3, which is $10,000. I've earlier written to the administration for a clarification. The government has explained that this is actually in compliance with the requirements in the international convention. Actually, the AIS is not unique to Hong Kong. The AIS would be a system that you would procure from the market, and they would have to satisfy the specifications laid down according to international conventions, and it should be able to achieve certain functions. And what is provided for here, it is not exhaustive. In other words, the AI system that you buy may be able to provide even some other functions, but our regulations only regulate local vessels, and all these requirements we have provided for here are what we require. That is, if such information are provided for, it would suffice. We have no objection for them providing more information, but so we therefore believe that this is the proper way to draft the requirements, because it would the most important thing is that when the ship vessel is equipped with the AIS, it would mean that the system will be able to satisfy all these requirements. But if it were to have other functions, that would be all right. Thank you. Well, the current drafting set specified information will need to be provided for, but it's not explained what they are. You say that all they need to do is to provide the specified information that you require, but it's not spelled out in the regulations. Now, in future, if you want to add to the specified information, you don't need to need another piece of legislation, because if non-compliance with a proper excuse would result in a maximum fine of $10,000. Well, I have a question for the legal advisor. Now here, it spells out what is meant by the specified information. But if I understand your point, because you said specified information means what is included. But if in future the government want to ask for 3 additional requirements, then the ordinance will need to be amended. Not necessarily. If now, since it is exhaustive, so therefore there's no need for the ordinance to be amended if further requirements are imposed. Does it mean that the Marine Department will say from now on these are the additional requirements that will be that would apply?
Well, let me put it in this way. They can impose such a requirement even though they are not amending the regulation. So perhaps members may want to inquire with the administration to see how the stakeholders can understand the type of information needed. It can be amended, it can be changed, not necessarily with an amendment to the regulation, so as to achieve the purpose of adding more items to be required. So you're worried that they may want to ask for more information, adding to the hardship of the industry, but then the electrical won't have a role to play. So what is your reply? We do not have intention to do so. Well, as to what is stated here, the information specified is in line with what is stated in the International Convention. And in fact, they also use the term includes. So it is no different from the International Convention, with no plan to secretly add more items of information to be specified. Yes, of course, you may very well say so, but then we have to be careful. So, sorry, speaker is off mic. If we believe that it is a matter of concern, do we have any counter proposal? Unless we spell out all the specified information. It has already been spelled out, but the term include has been used. In other words, you're suggesting that we take away the word includes, but then it will be very cumbersome to draft in this way. So administration, rather than saying that the specified information includes blah, 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 you simply say that specified information is so and so forth. Maybe the law draftsman can comment. Our policy is that this is all the information that we need, and with no intention to arbitrarily add any other requirements. As I have said, the equipments are not homemade and you can't do it yourself. In other words, you're buying it in the market, and all those models available in the market will be in line with the international requirements. So you either have it or you don't. So the policy intention is clear. So maybe we can check with the law draftsman. Can you take away the word includes? Thank you, Chair. As your legal advisor has said, includes may mean more. In other words, it is not exhaustive. But of course, it is not necessarily the only interpretation. It depends on how the court looks at it. As the DS has said, when the sentence was drafted, we have made reference to the International Convention. Since it is the wording adopted in the International Convention, it is better not to change it. Just now the Bureau has explained clearly its policy intention. Should there be a controversy or a dispute, I'm sure the court will try to understand the original legislative intent in trying to understand what this means. Now, if the AIS on a vessel has provided such information, then the Bureau, the government is already satisfied, and we are following the wording in the International Convention. If you want to change it, then we need to revise the regulation. Mr. Tam, I'm also worried. This is because in the case of specified information, it talks about the identity, type, position, course, speed, etc. That's why with us, ever since we have got vessels, we have got such information. But what about navigational status and other safety-related information of the vessel? They cover a very broad scope. For you to draft the law in this way, of course, you have told us that you have been borrowing the term from an international convention. However, what is meant by navigational status and what is meant by other safety-related information? Say, for example, a vessel catches fire, it is dangerous, so all the safety-related information certainly catches this. But the AIS won't give you this information. The AIS can't tell you that the vessel is on fire. I'm not saying that it is totally impossible, but as of now, you don't have that information. The message won't crop up automatically. Perhaps you need to press a particular button before you can tell the Marine Department that your vessel is on fire. So I'm saying that the scope is too broad and it will be difficult to argue your case. Let me sort of say that if the operator is prosecuted for failing to provide the information that the vessel is on fire, well, the case can be established because this is also other safety-related information. Thank you, Mr. Tam. Thank you, Chair. Let us keep our heads cool. We don't sort of talk about giving a free hand to people to design their own system. Now we are talking about an equipment. When you purchase it from in the market, those models available are all in compliance with the international requirements. We have been drafting the regulation in line with the requirements of the International Convention, and that International Convention governs larger vessels, and they also use this phrase. So for us in the government, why would we want a smaller vessel to provide information which is not available from that system? And I don't think the court would allow us to criticize someone for not being able to do that. Mr. Chairman, 2 points here. Now, for specified information to be drafted in this way, why don't you make reference to the International Convention? Cite the relevant section of the International Convention. Maybe there are specifications like the hammers for the motorcycles. The Hong Kong government won't come up with its own standard. The Hong Kong government will make reference to an international standard. Why don't you just make reference to an international standard, and then we can avoid the dispute as to someone is meeting the requirements? And then you said that we have to cover such information. I'm yet to talk about the navigational status. What is meant by that? Navigational status means whether it is anchored or whether it is sort of in passage. So navigational status simply boils down to whether it has been anchored or whether it is in motion. Yes, for the navigational status, for this term, I want to know whether it is easily understood and there's no misunderstanding. Well, let me talk about the AIS requirement. We have already got the definition for AIS. And in fact, we have lifted it from an international requirement. We need to meet the requirements of the ITU. So the AIS must meet the requirements of the ITU. In other words, the specified information should be available. The requirements are clear. Say, for example, what each item refers to. And it's not up to the MD to make arbitrary changes. There is an international organization defining the content of the message. All AIS devices should be able to do that unless it is not able to meet the ITU's requirements. So we are looking for this kind of AIS. So it's not a matter of we being able to change the requirements of the specified information. Why don't you talk about the type of models that have been sort of accredited? In other words, the information is automatic. It's not for the crew member to type in the information. So it is like the black box. The only requirement is that whenever you're in motion, you need to switch it on. The coxswain may not know what information will be given out, but in fact the information is already available. Why don't you make reference to an international standard? Well, it is exactly because the term specified information is being used in the international convention. Well, for the international convention, the Chinese version also refers to bao could include. In local legislation, if we don't follow suit, if we don't comply with the requirements, it will be an offense and there will be a fine of $10,000 at level 3. I think the concern is established. No, I don't think so. We can't change the requirements. As the LA has said, it is a matter of whether there is a reasonable excuse. If the law enforcement agency makes unreasonable requirements, it won't be accepted. If the required information exceeds the requirements under SOLAS, then it is already a reasonable excuse. Maybe we have read too much into it. Say, for example, we have got an accredited model. I have it here, and there's no way that I can make any changes, add more or take away the information because it is fully automatic. So the coxswain has this duty, that is, before he sets the vessel in motion, he has to make sure that the equipment is in good working order. Is there a way for the equipment to be tested? So he switches it on. How can he tell whether it is functioning properly? Perhaps he sees a light on, but can he be sure that the messages are being sent out?
Yes. He can find out what information is being sent out by the AIS, including the name of the vessel, the type, the model. So when the system is being installed, the information is already preset into the system. Well, I've not seen the AI system myself. Other than the machinery, there is a screen. So once it is switched on, all the data will be displayed. And when you see such display, then you will know that the system is operational. It's like the Bluetooth system that we use. When you switch on the loudspeaker, it will tell you that it's successfully matched, and I would know that my Bluetooth is now connected. Well, if that's the case, then it doesn't really matter how you provide for the specifications. According to the regulation, so long as you don't comply with the requirements for the AIS, there is a chance that you might be in breach. So it's all a question of interpretation. Our two colleagues, do you have any suggestions? We can't think of any better solution. We may need to consult the experts. Chairman, well, I'm a novice here, but can we decide until can we wait until our next meeting before we decide? Chairman, I don't think this is a very complicated bill. Why don't we defer this to the department and the law draftsman and see whether they can come up with a better solution, and then they can circulate their response in writing for us. So there's no need for us to move a CSA. I think we can proceed accordingly, and then they can inform us. And if we do not intend to move any amendments, then we can, go for the third reading. We'll report to the House, and then, Chairman, may I suggest that in relation to the concerns raised by members and the way the regulations are drafted, we will prepare a document, and we will explain how we use the solar to help us draft the requirements, and we give an undertaking that we will not, when we take enforcement action, we will not go beyond what is provided for, here, so that we don't need to move a CSA. Because the current draft is in order. Basically, one can say that it's already been very, scrupulously, very stringently scrutinized. But we can give members a document to put your mind at ease. Thank you. In the administration's response, actually, Hong Kong is not the only jurisdiction with such a piece of regulation. I'm sure there are, similar regulations elsewhere. Perhaps may I suggest that we can make reference of how other jurisdictions like the UK, the States, and Singapore deal with this issue. Yeah, we can certainly do that. As our legal advisor said, there are provisions in the international convention, but then if we do not comply with what is required according to the regulations, it would be in breach. So I think you should spell out in the regulation that your requirements will not exceed what is provided for in this regulation. Certainly, we could do that. What about the timetable? Do we need to apply for an extension? the original date deadline is the 6th of January, so we have to apply for an extension. Can we apply for an extension until the 8th of February? And we will need to report to the House by the 8th. I left out one question earlier. When the vessel is, traveling at sea and the system breaks down, how should this be dealt with? Should the vessel continue with its journey, or should it continue with the rest of the journey until it reaches the next port of call? I think this is provided for in the ordinance. That is the coxswain or the operator will try to revive the system as soon as possible. The vessel can continue with its journey. Of course, we hope that everybody will comply with the requirements. But when you conduct inspection, you would normally intercept a vessel while it's traveling and check on board whether the system is in order. But then if the system is broken down after the ship has set out from the port, well, that can be addressed. Once if the air system is operating normally, the signals can be picked up in many places. I'm talking about 3 pieces of equipment: the radio, the VHF radio, the AS, and the radar. What about the first 2? The VHF radio and the radar. If they should break down during the journey, and you don't know when they broke down. For the radar, it's the same. The coxswain will ensure that it wouldn't be repaired as soon as possible. But it is not required for the radar to be switched on at all times. It can only need to be switched on when there is such a need. For example, when there is poor visibility. Even for large vessels, it's not required for the radar to be switched on at all times. When you go on board a vessel, you have to ensure that the radar is operational. But then the coxswain may give the excuse that, it was operational when we set out, it just broke down just now. So how can you ensure that people will not resort to making excuses like that? That is, how can you, as in the case of other, of course, if we discover that the system is broken down, we will require them to fix it as soon as possible, and we will check subsequently. For each vessel, there would be a specified time for the vessel to be inspected. So all they can delay is until the time of the next inspection. So I think we are saying is that we want to ensure everybody will ensure that the vessels are operating normally. You say it should be fixed as soon as possible. Have you explained that ASAP must mean that the system should be fixed before it sets out on its next journey? So it's like motor vehicles, we have an inspection system. And if any defects were found during the inspection, the defects will need to be fixed, and then the owner will need to go for a second inspection. I'm sure it will be the same for vessels. And for motor vehicles, when you try to, catch those vehicles which are emitting a lot of smoke, well, of course, the vessel would be traveling on the road before you can catch them. And the culprit will be given a notice requiring him to fix the problem within a specified time. Will you make the same requirement of sea vessels? Today, let's say my vessel is traveling at sea, and in your random check you discover that the radar or the VHF radio are not functional, and then they will need to be fixed. Would you allow them 10 days or a week to fix them, and then you'll come back for a second inspection? Would that be the case? Other than the annual inspection, that is. when you take random checks, if you discover any defects, will you allow them a specified time and require them to fix the problem, and then you will inspect them again? If in the course of our inspection we discover any defects with the radar, of course we hope that the coxswain can give a reasonable excuse as to why the radar has broken down. Normally, we require them to repair it as soon as possible. In the course of inspection, when these defects are found, we would require the coxswain to repair or to fix the radar. Will you have a second inspection, a follow-up inspection? If you make the requirement for it to be fixed, you will need to check that it's done. After we've discovered the defect, we will take follow-up action to ensure that they've actually, heeded your advice. So that is after you've identified the defect, you allow them some time to follow up, and they will need to prove that they've actually rectified the problem. So you may allow them 7 days or 14 days. That's up to the Marine Department to decide. The owner may require some time to order the parts. The important thing is that you have to follow up. You don't have to wait until the next annual inspection before you check whether they've actually fixed the problem, because all you're doing is to ensure, ensure safety, right? Let's say for this trip the radar has broken down. You say that the radar then must be fixed ASAP. Does it mean that tomorrow I will not be able to, move the vessel? But if I can prove that I already booked the components, I've already arranged for a serviceman to to service the system, does it mean that I can continue to operate the vessel, or must the vessel be suspended from moving at sea? If it is a necessary equipment on board, then a responsible owner of the vessel would need to inform the Marine Department. If he has difficulty in buying the components or fixing the problem, we will allow them some time to fix it, and then because the radar must satisfy the requirements as provided for in the license. Let's not talk about whether one should be responsible or not, because this applies to everyone. Let's say, unfortunately, there is a collision today, and you discovered that 2 weeks ago, after you inquire with other witnesses, you found out that the radar had broken down 2 weeks ago, and the owner has attempted to fix it, except that the parts will only arrive in 1 month's time. So during this interim period, he's already satisfied the requirement to fix it ASAP, but there is a collision today. Would you then prosecute the owner? He has not notified the Marine Department that the radar has broken down 2 days ago. He didn't, notify the Marine Department. In this case, would he be in breach? Actually, regarding the radar, in 33D, Legal Notice 180, it says that the radars installed on ships should be maintained at all times in good operational state or order.
If for any reason the radar cannot be operated, then the operator must make sure that the system should be brought back to normal working order when it is practicable to do so. Otherwise, it will be a fine of $10,000. It is much clearer. All right, that's it. I want to check with the two colleagues if you would like to have a public hearing for the stakeholders. No? I don't think we need a further meeting. All right. We'll wait for a written reply from the administration in response to Mr. Steven Ho's questions as well as the questions we were raised. Thank you. Thank you, members. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you.